Real Virginia is proudly produced by the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation. Since 1926, Farm Bureau has been working to preserve Virginia farms and our rural heritage. Visit our website at virginiafarmbureau.com.
Home will always be Virginia, between the Blue Ridge and Chesapeake Bay, Atlantic to Appalachia, home in my heart always.
Hello everyone and welcome to Real Virginia, a show about Virginia agriculture and the people who produce all of the wonderful products we enjoy, brought to you by the Virginia Farm Bureau.
A recent trade conference highlighted the importance of exports to Virginia farmers. Mark Viette shows us how to care for succulents, the perfect houseplant, and we explore why victory gardens were so important to America and the lessons they still teach us.
Welcome back everyone. We are coming to you from a Richmond Southern States store where they're gearing up for spring, and hotel meeting rooms and conferences aren't where you expect to see farmers with spring this close to bloom. But as Norm Hyde reports, with several important trade negotiations on the horizon, there's a lot of interest.
The 10th Annual Virginia Governors Conference on Agricultural Trade in March brought the ambassadors from Canada and Mexico together with the Governor of Virginia and plenty of farmers. Everyone at the event agreed it was important for the state to secure farm exports around the world.
In 2017, Virginia exported $2.64 billion worth of agriculture and forestry products. That's about 30% of farm and forest cash receipts.
Our crops have had quite a bit of devaluation in the last few years, which has caused difficulties making budgets work for agriculture. And we need that trade to improve, and we need those commodity values to go up.
Governor Ralph Northam told the conference he remains committed to promoting Virginia farm and forest exports around the world and to working at the state level to update the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA was signed more than 20 years ago, and Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. are currently negotiating an update to the treaty.
Since NAFTA was enacted in 1996, Virginia agriculture and forestry exports to Canada have grown by 475%, and to Mexico by more than 1,300%. These two countries alone import 17% of all Virginia agriculture and forestry exports.
In a panel discussion at the conference, the ambassadors from Canada and Mexico agreed a new NAFTA is in the best interest of all parties. But nothing's ever easy in world politics. When the conference was held the first week of March, President Trump had just proposed steep import tariffs on steel and aluminum products, a promise he carried out a week later. Canada and Mexico were exempted from the tariffs temporarily. Anything that threatens free trade worries American farmers, said American Farm Bureau Federation President Zippy Duval.
When we start putting tariffs on things, we can look back in history and see what happens. And it's exactly what Mr. Perdue said just a few minutes ago. Most of the time, agriculture gets the blunt of that. China is important to us. It is an important market for our soybeans and other agricultural products like corn, dairy, pork, and poultry and cotton. And let's not forget that China is a top market for Virginia. Exports nearly $3 billion of agriculture exports leaving Virginia going to China.
The threat of new tariffs certainly complicates NAFTA negotiations, but Duval and other parties say they're hopeful that cooler heads will prevail and a new treaty can be reached before the end of this year.
I think if we all stay calm and watch the professionals work through things, that we'll get back to some standards that work for agriculture and help with agricultural trade.
Engel raises corn, wheat, soybeans, barley, milo, canola, and rapeseed. Many of his crops are made into flour or animal feed, but a significant portion of them are also exported. American farmers are some of the most efficient in the world, and grain prices have been declining as supplies grow. So anything that slows farm exports truly affects Engel's bottom line.
We've talked a long time about how can agriculture produce enough food for the growing population of the world. That really doesn't bother me. I know that agriculture in the can produce the food. What bothers me is how those economies can afford to buy it. Doesn't do them any good to need it if they can't afford to buy it. And we've all got to have good trade so that all economies of the world can do well.
From the positive mood at the Governor's Conference on Agricultural Trade, it appears there is still plenty of goodwill among NAFTA negotiators, and hopes are other trade disagreements can be worked out. In Richmond, Virginia, I'm Norm Hyde.
Exports of all Virginia agricultural and forestry products grew 62% from 2002 to 2016, peaking at just over $3.35 billion in 2014. There was a slight decline the following year due to the higher value of the U.S. dollar and slower global growth. The largest Virginia ag exports in 2016 were poultry products, soybeans, tobacco, wheat, dairy products, and beef. Soybeans and soy meal are even more prominent in export sales in 2017. Hardwood lumber is another strong overseas seller from the Old Dominion. The top international destinations for Virginia farm products have been China, Canada, Switzerland, Mexico, and Russia.
I'm Mark Viette. Coming up on In the Garden, I'm going to talk about a hot new trend. Stay with us.
More than 90 years ago, the Virginia Farm Bureau made a promise to our local farmers to protect and preserve a way of life they'd worked so hard to establish. Today, our insurance agents work to protect all Virginians, not just farmers. Anyone can be a Farm Bureau member and enjoy the many benefits of membership. There's a local Farm Bureau in every county of the state. We think everyone should be a friend of the farm. Visit our website at vafb.com to learn more.
Looking for a low-maintenance houseplant? Mark Viette has some tips to care for your succulents in the garden.
Cacti and succulents have really become popular over the last few years. And part of the reason is you can grow them indoors. You don't need to grow them outdoors, though many of us do. They're easy to grow. They do not take a lot of water. In fact, overwatering sometimes will kill some of the cacti and succulents. I'm here at Strange's greenhouse, where not only do they have large jade plants, but they have baby jade plants. Keep in mind, this plant is going to look like this, and I've seen some 4 or 5 times bigger than this. Many of the cactus and succulents do like to go through that rest period. So during some of the winter months, you might hold off on watering, maybe once a month. You might even see the leaves shrivel a little bit. Another popular succulent that we can all grow is aloe vera. It's known as the aloe plant. One of the things that these plants like is maybe afternoon sun, so at least give them full afternoon sun. I guess a couple things you just need to keep in mind is if you have cactus and they do have spines, you have to worry about your pets. I always remember I had a fluffy gray cat, long-haired cat, and it got into a cactus, so you have to worry about, and that was a real pain, taking out the spines. You know, this is a euphorbia. It's in the same family as poinsettia, so plants can look very different. Now, some of the larger cactus, during times of the year when they go dormant, you have to remember a lot of plants go dormant in different parts of the world. Maybe it's in the summer, maybe it's in the winter, but sometimes on some cactus, you're only going to water them maybe once a month. But really, when you look at the attractive, beautiful succulents, they're great for terrariums. You can put them in little containers. You can actually take small containers like this and plant a mixture. And again, you don't want to overwater. You want to use what we call a cactus-like mix. This is a mix that drains well, and it's very important that you do not have your containers sitting in a tray. If they're sitting in a tray, the tray needs to be filled with pebbles so the water drains through. This is euphorbia. It's also known as crown of thorns. It's also related to the poinsettia. I really enjoy the things like the agave and, you know, beautiful agave, the gray agave, or the green and yellow variegated agave. But I will tell you, because we grow these in our tropical garden in St. Thomas, they have very sharp thorns. So for indoor use, I recommend taking a shears and snipping the thorns so people or pets do not get hurt. Easy to grow. Look at this. All different types, shapes. And the other great thing about cactus is that they grow slowly, or many of them grow slowly. So you can keep a plant for 20, 30 years. You can get your grandmother's plant or your mother's plant, and you can keep it. I'm Mark Viette. Join me next time in the garden.
For more garden tips, go to inthegardenradio.com.
Fish and Virginia potatoes go well together. Chef Maxwell has a tasty twist on a classic French recipe up next in the heart of the home.
Colonial Virginians were very familiar with salt cod. Chef John Maxwell puts his own spin on this classic recipe using Virginia potatoes in the heart of the home.
Hi, I'm Chef John Maxwell and welcome to the Heart of the Home. We're here at Meadow Hall and Meadow Event Park in Doswell, Virginia, where every week we get a chance to play with some great food. Almost always is big Virginia food. Today we're going to go a little international, but it's got a Virginia base. We're going to be using some Virginia agricultural products. We're going to use some dairy and some potatoes and some other products, but we're dealing with salt cod, an international product that it's kind of like the ham of the sea. It's treated like a Smithfield ham is, but it's fish. So we're going to be making an old French dish called brandade de morue, which is basically a pate of fish and potatoes. And so I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about this. This is the salt cod that I've soaked, and I've got a piece over here soaking, so you see it's just a question of putting it in fresh water, changing the water a couple of times, and it goes from a very stiff board into something that's very soft and usable here, right? So once I've got it soft, then I poach it in water, right, which I've got some here, right? And you can see it stiffens it up, right, cooks it. Right? And then I soak it in hot milk. Right? So the hot milk, right, gives it a flavor, helps absorb some of the salt. So in order to make this dish, I need a bowl, and I'm going to put the fish in the bowl. And I'm just going to mash it down in the bottom of the bowl, right, just to get it broken up. And now I'm going to be working with the potatoes, right? And I'm going to peel these so they'll mash up good. And I've got these there, and they're very hot. So I'm just going to peel these. It's easier to peel them when they're hot and cooked than when they're raw, especially these beautiful little red potatoes. All right, you get that. Want to use the waxy kind of potato for this dish because the brandade, it's like a pate, so it needs to be silky and smooth and robust. So these will be in your market pretty soon. The skin is not going to hurt the dish, but it'll affect the texture a little bit, and it'll give you bits of color that you may not want to have. Now the secret to this is equal parts of fish and potatoes. So we need, if you're going to use a pound of potatoes, use a pound of fish. If you're going to use 2 pounds of fish, use 2 pounds of potatoes. So now I'm going to mash the potatoes up with this. I'm going to put some gloves on to finish processing this. Now I'm going to add some lemon juice and some lemon zest. All right. Those are in there, nice and mixed up. Now you can add other things to this if you want, some chopped green onions, some chopped parsley to give it a little bit of color if you like. All right. I'm going to add the milk now. And there's some whole peeled garlic that I cooked with the milk that I'm going to add into it too. And now what makes it a brandade is we're going to make an emulsion with some olive oil. So now to make the emulsion, I'm going to slowly stream a little bit of olive oil in at a time, a little bit at a time, and mix it up very good with my hands. Now, I don't like putting this in a processor because it makes it too runny, makes it too smooth. We want a little bit of chunk to this. It's going to take about a cup of olive oil to make this right. Now, I don't want to add any salt to this. And you can see the texture now. There's a chunky, smooth, or loose paste. And we're going to bake this, and this is going to go right down in there. The recipe calls for me to grease the pan, but in all the times I've made this, I haven't really needed to grease the pan. There's enough olive oil in it for it to be, for it not to stick too much, and a little bit of sticking isn't going to be bad. We're not going to try and turn this out as a mold. We're going to use the dish that it's baked in, sprinkle it with some grated cheese. Hard cheese is best, Parmesan or Romano, something like that, and into the oven it goes. All right, here we've got the brandade de morue, the pâté of codfish, of salted cod. We're ready to serve this, and I've got some bread rounds that I have cut and toasted. Just scoop in here. And that's delicious. Absolutely delicious. If you want to find out how this tastes, I'm going to be at the French Food Festival in Richmond on April 27th and 28th, and I'm fixing this dish there. So stop on by, say hello. So join us next week on Heart of the Home, where we get to play with great Virginia food.
Recipes from the heart of the home can be found on the Virginia Farm Bureau website at vafb.com, as well as on Chef Maxwell's website at chefjohnmaxwell.com. Virginia potatoes are an early summer delicacy. Grown mostly on the eastern shore for commercial purposes, the smaller red potatoes have a delicious taste and a competitive advantage. Potatoes were raised on 5,000 acres in Virginia in 2017, generating $19.4 million in farm income. Almost all those potatoes are shipped fresh to supermarkets on the East Coast and as far north as Canada. Because Virginia potatoes are ready when most other potatoes are either finished or not yet ready to harvest, they have a tight market window to make their maximum profit. But you can still enjoy fresh local Virginia potatoes all summer long.
There are 30,000 roadway accidents each year involving cars and farm machinery. Farmers will be moving equipment for planting and harvest season. The slow-moving vehicle triangle in red and fluorescent orange colors and flashing lights allow for quick identification. When you see an SMV sign on farm equipment, slow down, prepare for sudden stops and slow turns.
Patience will save lives. Just remember, we all need to share the road, we all need to be responsible, and we need to be guided by the law.
Motor vehicle safety starts with you.
"2018 marks a century since the end of World War I. Dave Miller reports the lessons learned from Victory Gardens during World Wars I and II continue to be useful today.
Victory Gardens were first promoted during World War I, a century ago, as a way for ordinary citizens to contribute to the war effort. They were revived in World War II, and they continue to teach lessons today. The students at Nelson County High School not only planted a Victory Garden in the fall of 2017, they won first place at a State Fair of Virginia student horticulture competition.
Victory Gardens are the perfect example of sustainable agriculture. Victory Garden was to produce and raise food during World War II when mass-produced crops were being sent overseas, probably for rations in the military and that kind of thing. It was a way for people back home to produce their own food and be able to sustain themselves.
It was a good experience to know how to grow a garden and especially later in life when you need to teach your kids and be able to carry on the tradition, so it'll keep going in the future.
More than 20 million Victory Gardens were planted during World War II, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These gardens produced an estimated 9 to 10 million tons of fruit and vegetables, equaling the amount of commercial production. Most communities relied on their local extension agents and volunteers to help gardeners succeed. Those lessons still resonate today. In 2017, 8 high school horticulture classes entered the Victory Garden Exhibition Contest at the State Fair of Virginia. Margaret Seaman was in charge of the Nelson County students, which won the blue ribbon. Her students had to not only grow the vegetables, but figure out how to transport them, just like their great-grandparents did.
Because we had to raise it here and then transport it to the state fair, that provided a little bit of a difficulty in how are you going to do that and make it look like a real garden and not a raised bed garden. So one of the things we did, we grew them in big tubs, and they took care of all the vegetables throughout all of August and September, and then we transported everything down there.
We set up the background, which that was something. After that, we put up the fence, and then we put all the plants in where they needed to be and did it all from there.
Bacon, butter, and sugar were rationed back in 1940. That was followed by the rationing of meat, tea, jam, biscuits, breakfast cereals, cheese, eggs, lard, milk, and canned and dried fruit. Fresh vegetables and fruit weren't rationed at the time, but supplies were limited. So the project stressed self-reliance.
The project for the Victory Garden showed students essentially, this is what growing your own food looks like, okay? This is how you do it. This is the examples of how it's done and what it will look like in the end, what it looks like when it's growing. Teaching students how to grow food or teaching them where their food comes from is the ultimate goal of agricultural education, I would say, would be safe to say. And that's what our programs are here in horticulture and production agriculture.
I'd say my favorite part was watching the plants grow from seeds up until they grew it all the way up, and building the house was pretty fun about it too. That was a pretty good project.
The Student Victory Garden contained a lot of different vegetables and was grown in the fall, similar to home gardens during the war years. Gardening is the nation's #1 hobby, and that's true even in farm country.
A good amount of people around here have gardens. We are in rural Nelson County, and a lot of people can their food from their garden. So if you notice in the picture, we have it's the back of a house, but looking into a pantry, and it's lined with canned foods that were canned from the summer crops. And so we tried to even look into it as planning ahead for what was coming in the winter.
If you plant it yourself, you can just go out to the garden and pick it and cook it right there in your house.
The Nelson County High School students that worked on the Victory Garden project learned how to grow sustainable food and how to succeed in a competition with students from across the state. Victory gardening is a timeless pastime being introduced to the next generation, with a reminder that a regular food supply is never guaranteed. In Nelson County, Virginia, this is Dave Miller.
That's going to do it for this edition of Real Virginia. We're so glad you could join us to celebrate the bounty Virginia has to offer. Whether it's in your home, your garden, or even your chicken coop, we are proud to say that this is Real Virginia. So for everyone from the Virginia Farm Bureau, thanks for watching. Make it a good week.
Home will always be Virginia, between the Blue Ridge and Chesapeake Bay.